Hello. Hey, Jared. How you
Hey,
doing?
good morning. It's 11:11. Make a wish, my
Nice.
man.
Dude, what am I, a farmer? Getting me up all early? Right. Today we're going to talk. This is my podcast. Going to see my friends. Today I'm here with Jared, and we're going to talk about the five, in our opinion, our humble opinion, the five underrated bands that you guys should listen to, or that hasn't really got the attention they deserve, in our humble opinions.
Hmm.
So, Jared, you have five, right? You have five?
Yeah, and like I mentioned when we talked a little bit earlier, there's one that I realized that probably got more commercial attention, more success because they charted. They had some
Oh,
songs in
that's
the
right.
chart, but we'll spend maybe a little less time on that one. But I think
Okay.
there's some topics for debate on that, and we'll touch on those when we get
Okay.
there in terms of why people love or hate this band. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think there's. I mean, you and I have known each other for going on 30 years, probably 20, 25,
Jesus.
26, 27. Yeah, it was
Yeah,
like
somewhere
2001 when
close.
I met you.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe
Well, no, what?
I'm overblowing it a little bit, but about 23, 24 years. And I think during that time, musically and speaking more in terms of like rock, indie, alternative rock genre,
Yeah.
we've as friends and I think also as musicians and as people just kind of coming up in our 20s and 30s and into our 40s, we certainly have a musical palate or a taste, I think,
Yeah.
but
Well, sorry to interrupt, but there's bands on my list that you introduced me to that I would never have heard of if probably I hadn't heard them from you. I think there's two, maybe two on here.
hmm Oh, cool.
Yeah, two. Definitely two. So,
And you've
yeah.
introduced me to a number as well, so thank you for that over the
Oh,
years.
yeah.
And
Thank you.
but I think that the reason this topic I think is relevant to anybody, and I'm not saying everybody needs to really agree with us on or me on who these bands are. There's probably dozens of other ones that maybe deserved more than they got in terms of commercial success or recognition. So this may be just a sampling. I'd love to hear from
Yeah.
folks who comment on
Oh,
this
yeah.
when it's published. I particularly as I'm into my 40s now, and radio is less of a thing, and I
Yeah.
don't go out and see as many shows. I'm happy to be introduced to new things. So if anybody in the
Yeah.
comments or when this comes out, really just feel free.
Yeah.
I'm really open to that because I've
I'll
gotten to
put,
that point in
I'll
life
put
where I'm
all of the
like,
bands.
where's all the cool new bands at? That aren't on the radio, or whatever happened to MTV went to shit too. So
Yeah.
it's
Well, I'll
unless
put all
you're
the bands that we talk about in the description, and
yeah.
so since you are the guest, I'll let you go first. What we'll do is you do your number, and this is in no particular order. I'm assuming. For me, it's in no particular order. But
Mhm.
you'll go number five. I'll do number five. You do number four. We'll do it like that. Does that sound cool?
Yeah, just steer me
Okay.
in the right direction, man. I made a
Sweet.
list, and
Start us off, Jared.
before we start, do you have some that you're tossing in there?
I have my five. Do you want me to start?
Oh, I see what you mean. We'll go back and forth, like your five, my
Yeah.
five. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, like you
Okay,
go five, I go five, you go four, yeah, I go four.
I got it. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, this one, this one's near and dear because when I first started going to shows when I was 18, 19 years old, I lived up in the sticks, and we used to drive into Sacramento and go to the Cattle Club. And for anybody who might see this, who's from that era, the Cattle Club was a big, I think, incubator for a lot of bands in that scene, and I think even across the genre. But one of the local heroes there was this band called Far. And
Oh.
yeah, I went deep on that one. Far was one of those bands that I saw originally, when it was $5 to get into the Cattle Club. I think we were 18, and I was rolling with a crew that was everywhere from like 16 to 19. So it was an all ages venue. But what was great about that is you got this really raw, youthful energy that embraced up and coming music, up and coming genres. I even saw Sublime there at some point, and Bush and the Toadies, and
You
I
saw
saw.
that tour when the Toadies opened up for Bush?
Well, that was I saw them at the Warfield when they played that
Uh,
show, but I saw those bands independently
Gotcha.
at the
Okay.
Cattle Club. So
Yeah.
hats off to whoever was doing that at the time at the Cattle Club. Um, But the reason I think that, if we fast forward through, Far got, they had this local following. They got signed to, I think it was Immortal Records, which was like a subsidiary of Epic Records, if I'm not mistaken. They were just kind of this raw part of that early screamo, if you will. I think the guy that produced their first studio album when they were on Immortal dubbed it kind of the first screamo album to ever really be released. There was also this sort of sticker that was running around at the time called Almost Core, and I think it was a reference to like almost being hardcore, but it was still just a little less heavy. But the reason I picked this one as 5 is I think these guys were groundbreaking in that Deftones era of that like very heavy guitar, heavy drums, but really melodic vocals.
Yeah.
And I think where maybe the mainstream at the time, I wouldn't even say the mainstream, but maybe to some degree the commercial success or the lack thereof, they weren't really good at putting together great hooks. And I think sometimes that's where bands or even artists can succeed, is when they're really good at writing hooks. So I was going back and listening to some Far songs, some of my favorites, and asking myself, like, what's appealing about this? Why did I like it? Is it just sort of nostalgia of being 18 and moshing? Or musically speaking, like, what was appealing about it? And I think that I came up musically as a choir boy for 7 years. So I really learned a lot about dynamics, and I think that's where Far really excelled, as they could do these very delicate, emotional, gritty type of melodic lines with the guitar, drums. They were really good at dynamics. They could bring things down and then really build the song. I'll talk about another band that's phenomenal about that kind of later in the lineup. But I think they had a little bit of success. One of their songs was featured in a Buffy the Vampire Slayer episode. So they got signed to a major label. In fact, you might remember, what was the name of the studio where we recorded a demo at? Prairie Sun?
Yeah.
They recorded their first album on Immortal Records at the same studio that we had recorded in. So, but they had some songs with some hooks, maybe not necessarily with the pop sensibility of a more mainstream artist like a Green Day or something like that.
Yeah.
But the contrast here, why I chose this, really is interesting, because if you look at the number of plays and the followers that a band like the Deftones has, really some overlap in the genre and the style. They were from the same area, from the Sacramento area, but the Deftones got a lot more commercial success, although they weren't necessarily radio. They weren't played a lot on the radio. So it's interesting. What's your opinion? You have two bands that are somewhat similar. Not to say that the Deftones were identical, but they were from the same era, from the same area, and both got signed to somewhat independent but major labels, and one was more commercially successful and one was not. I mean, how do you see that? The Deftones aren't necessarily known for writing great hooks either.
Yeah. Well, that's what I always kind of, when you would play the Deftones a lot, and they had a few songs that I really liked, but I couldn't tell you the name of them, but I didn't hear, you talked about Far a lot, but I never could grasp what, like, could never grasp kind of like when Jonah was the lead singer, right?
Yeah.
On Far. So when he did his other stuff, then I could kind of identify, oh, that's, whatever, new and original, or that's this or whatever. But if you played a Far song, I couldn't tell you, like, I heard them much more than I did from you than I did actually hearing their music. Because I heard a lot more. You played a lot more Deftones, which I liked. And So yeah, I mean, I couldn't really identify what a Far song was, but I remember it. Knowing Jonah, the lead singer, not knowing him personally, but knowing his style of singing, like I could definitely see the similarities between Deftones and Far. And
I think they just did a really good job of. Not to vortex too much into the topic of Far, but for anyone listening to it, if you want to kind of get a taste of where that genre sort of developed, I think, I was reading on Wikipedia about Far, and a lot of, if you read other bands, I'm trying to remember the name of one, I'll think of it later potentially, but I think a lot of other bands were influenced by Far.
Yeah.
And I've seen that comment a lot over the years and kind of reading reviews or listening to interviews of other bands of that era. So I think, I just want to tip of the hat to them. They were out there doing it, playing the small clubs, playing the all ages, doing playing the heavier music, the heavy guitar riffs, the heavy drums. And as young folks, they were great musicians. And obviously Jonah was a gifted vocalist, and so putting it all together, I think it's worth a listen to anyone who hears this podcast. To, if you're kind of a nerd about understanding where genre sort of the ground spring of where that was happening, Sacramento at the time. And then you had your other bands that came out of Sacramento that were a little more commercially successful, like Papa Roach, Love 'Em or Hate 'Em, Deftones we talked about. Even in that same era, there was somebody's going to sharpshoot me about this, but who did Short Skirt Long Jacket? Cake.
Oh,
totally different type of genre, but they were this music scene that came out of Sacramento. There was a lot going on there. And I think even in the 80s and early 90s, what was the other sort of hair band that came out of Sacramento?
Oh, man.
It was huge.
Oh, it's not what you got. Tesla.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
So shout out to Sacramento and all the music that's come out of there. There's probably a lot of other genre and other people that, people would comment about, but there was a lot going on there. So I just wanted to bring up Far.
Sweet.
They never really they were big in Japan. I think is where their biggest record sales were, if I remember that. But, they great band,
cool, man.
Really pioneers and part of that early scene. If you want to relate that to like sort of the Seattle grunge, like Far was part of one of those original Sacramento kind of hardcore or screamo type of genre, kind of came from there. So we can move on from there, but that's my comment on that. My number 5.
Cool, man. Well, hey, we're starting off strong. That was a good one. And you'll know this one. This one's again in no particular order. I always felt like Sparta was a band that they kind of got big for a second in terms of commercial, but they never really were on the radio. I think they came out at the end of MTV, so I know they made videos, but I know that like I never saw it on MTV. Wait, okay, and
that's a whole other podcast. What the fuck happened to MTV? That was like a brilliant platform that went to shit.
I mean, that was MTV was really, they kind of helped shepherd in like a new kind of, you could see bands. They had shows like 120 minutes and all that kind of stuff. But anyways, I digress. Yeah, heavy metal.
Kennedy.
What is it? Headbangers Ball. That's what it was. Sparta. They came out in 2000. I think 2. Wait, what do I have here? My notes. 2002. Came out with that Wiretap Scars, which is how you were playing it. You were playing like the demo of that, I believe, or something. It was before they signed to Dreamforce or DreamWorks. And so I remember you were playing that demo, and then they came out with the official album, and I was just floored by that sound, because it was kind of, I was always like maybe a hard rocker, not necessarily like heavy metal, although I started playing heavy metal when I started playing music, but it was more of that bridge between like hardcore and hard rock, because you had, and like what you were saying about Far was you kind of had this like really aggressive type of music, and he could scream with the best of them, but he could also kind of bring it down. And what I liked about the more mellow stuff that they did was that, and mellow in the first couple albums, 3 albums, was that his voice was always kind of still rough, but it was still beautiful. Now I don't know if that makes any sense, but
Yeah.
because they could scream, and then when they would play the slower type, not ballads per se, but just this kind of slower type stuff, there was still a musical kind of landscape there that was not just playing open chords and singing, which was beautiful as well. But I mean, they just kind of, there was still a guitar doing its own thing, and there was the bass was doing its own thing. And that's what I got to meet him last year. And I remember talking to him about why I was so into Wiretap Scars, was because even in the mellow songs, they had all these different things going on. It wasn't just straight ahead. I'm playing the D to the A to the D back into an E. It was very it was just a lot going on, but still very heartfelt and it could still get you. And so yeah, they made their first 3 albums, and I think he was talking about when I was talking with him, he was talking about I feel like I'm name dropping here, but anyways,
Just
he
hashtag the
was talking
names.
about, because they're on tour promoting um, Porcelain. Now they're going to play Porcelain, and he said that it was a really hard time in his life. And I was looking up the Wikipedia on him, and his cousin had died during that time, and or I think it was after they made Porcelain, maybe, I don't know, but it was during that tour. And but I mean, even then they were like so solid and so, I mean, the screaming and the hard lyrics were always a big selling point for me, because that's how I felt, and you can kind of identify with those
Yeah.
kind of, yeah, things like
Yeah. I
that.
have a thought on, keeping with a little bit of the theme of that commercial success, or underrated, so to speak, or why
Yeah.
more people didn't hear him, or the radio play thing. As we were, and by the way, in honor of, they're on my
I
list
saw
too.
that. I
So
have that shirt.
we're doing 2 birds with 1 stone here. You brought up the Wiretap Scars album. I think you and I went to see them. I think it was the Snowcore tour, and I forget what
Yeah.
what year it was, in San Francisco. And I think to your point about their ability to kind of have that emotional appeal and the melody, but at the same time the aggressiveness to be able to flow in and out of sort of this hardness and softness. I feel like now, being like almost 50 and like doing yoga sometimes, that there's this sort of a need in life, why I think from a visceral perspective, like as humans, especially as like people in modern society, there are these moments where you need to be able to be soft and you need to be able to be firm and hard. And I think
Yeah.
that appeal, and the thing that blows me away about Sparta, and why I'm glad you have this on your list as well, the
Yeah.
Wiretap Scars album, in my opinion, going through like Sans Cosm and the Glasshouse Tarot, those had great hooks, in my opinion. And the cool thing with like, I was listening to Breaking the Broken.
Oh yeah.
Sparta had, and by the way, they were kind of born of At the Drive-In. And even when you go back and listen to song composition by those guys, and then how they split off, and then Sparta was one of the 2 bands, Mars Volta obviously being the other. Their composition of those songs is very solid. I mean, they've got some things that kind of have your basic chorus and your verse. They've got these great sort of little bridges. And then I was listening to Breaking the Broken. I was like, oh, I never really dissected that whole like pre-chorus that they have in that. And I think to me, I never understood. I'm glad, because guys like you and I and their sort of cult following that loved them and could go see them for $20 at a reasonably sized venue, it was a benefit to us. But I think that what I didn't understood, musically speaking, is why they didn't have the bigger commercial success, because they had, some good pop sensibilities here and there, where they could write a good hook, great song composition, but it just didn't necessarily stick. And even with the label support of DreamWorks, it was fascinating to me why they didn't really get bigger. But yeah.
Well, they opened, they opened for some big bands, and for me, I always thought, I remember it in the early 2000s. I remember thinking, oh, okay, this is it. They're going to get big and people are going to hear them. But they just didn't really take that next step, which I think is a good thing because I think not all bands are cut out for that. For that, some bands implode when they get so big that they're just like, hey, well, you were just playing garages like last year, and now we're playing stadium. Some people can't handle that, and so I'm glad that. And from what I've read too, Jim Ward, the lead singer, he probably couldn't handle. That's not what he wanted. So when they were on tour for Porcelain, he quit midway because he was just like, the band's not where it needs to be. He was just filled with self-doubt. And so, he came back, they wrote threes, and then they went on tour. And so I think and I just saw a podcast with him probably about a year ago, from a year ago. And he was, dude's chill. He's mellow. Matt, his bass player, was with him, and they were just talking about the anniversary of Wiretap Scars. And so, yeah, I mean, he's pretty happy with the way that Sparta turned out. So,
yeah, I think it was it 2 years ago they did the Wiretap Scar anniversary tour. I got to see him in Sacramento. It was fantastic.
Yeah. So I saw him on that tour like the night before, I think, in San Francisco, which was crazy because the tickets were like $60, I think. But for VIP, it was only like $92 with fees and everything. And so I was like, all right, cool, man. I'll go see him. And I think I told you the story, but it was like there were 6 of us in the VIP in this. It was at the Great American Music Hall, which it's big, but it's small. It's still intimate, and so I'm lucky that I got to meet him. He was really cool guy.
I think isn't that where we saw the Snowcore tour?
Yeah, we talked about that too. Because I told him all the times I had seen him, and I was like, he goes, I go, yeah, I went and saw you guys in 2012 and he goes, oh, I remember that. Where was that? And I told him, it was at the Independent. He goes, oh, I love that place, man. Is that place still open? I was like, yeah.
Yeah, that's where we first saw Silver Sun Pickups, I think, opened for Sparta or something like that. And
that was at that was
the rickshaw stop.
Yeah, no, that was it. The rickshaw. It was over by the stadium by Oracle Park where the Giants play.
Yeah, I'm thinking of a
down
different
some
show.
alley. Yeah, it was down some alley, and then it was like a speakeasy or something. And you had to knock 3 times, not really, but it was just kind of hidden place. And then it was Silver Sun Pickups, and then Sparta came on. Yeah, so.
Yeah, the great era. It's been good, and revisiting some of these as you and I were talking about doing this podcast, because I mean, if you take nostalgia aside from sort of our glory days, I think being more musically mature and going back and listening to it now is like, especially after spending time watching all the Rick Beato video podcasts, is like, I think going back and listening to this type of music, like I can sort of mentally more kind of dissect and understand why I liked it at the time and why it's still relevant, I think, today. And again, if anybody knows any bands and that hear this that they'd like to introduce us to, I think we're happy to do that. But Sparta definitely big influence on a lot of other music that I liked and I think that we played. And I don't know, I don't mean to take your glory on your number 5 here, but
no, go for it. If we have the same band, let's keep talking about them.
Yeah, I think other things that I love about Sparta really were also, being a drummer.
Ouch.
There's a lot of rock bands that, there's a lot of similarities in terms of their rhythm sections. And I think a lot of Sparta, I don't know if I credit the drummer or the rhythm section or the band as a whole, but like rhythmically speaking, that things were not particularly repetitive.
Right.
But they did have these sort of more punk driven type of rhythmic. Yeah. And then they played some kind of offbeat syncopated type of stuff. As well as some real good, straightforward kind of pocket rock that was really appropriate for the songs. And I think that was something that was appealing to me. Wasn't particularly complex or flashy, but very appropriate for the songs with like little nuances that made them a little more unique, I think, than, something more
Yeah, I
straightforward.
mean, I don't mean to interrupt, but it's like I feel like at parts when they were writing the song, Jim would just be like, "I'm just gonna noodle here," but it wasn't like noodling, like there was no direction to it or no thought to it, but it was more of like it was very elegant, very it fit the song, and you would think like, man, how would you think of that? Yeah, there was a song, I think it's RXQ Coupe.
Hmm?
That comes after. I don't know what song that is. It's off of Wiretap. The way he plays that, the way he plays the rhythm of that is incredible. Like I don't know how you would play and sing that because he's constantly moving his fingers and constantly going to different chord shapes. And he plays like I play like him. Our styles are really kind of similar. So when he's playing like lead lines in like a chord progression, uh, I was shocked. Like that's how I thought it was like two guitars playing two different things that kind of because like the Stones and Guns N' Roses are really good at blending their rhythm guitars. They had two rhythm guitarists that sometimes, and they were good at like blending their rhythm. So they weren't playing the same thing, but it sounded like it sounded great. And that's what he did, but he does it by himself, and that's crazy to me.
Yeah, and I think in the
That was
early
mind
days of
blowing.
Sparta, they had two guitar players as well, right? It
Yeah,
was Jim and the
yeah.
other guy. So maybe over the years, when at different moments where it was just him, he had to figure out how to stitch those
Yeah.
together on his own. Um, I'm
Which
sure
is
if he were here, we
incredible.
could ask him. He might say, "Yeah, it was easier to play when there were two of us." But yeah, that's a
Yeah,
great point. I think the era of the guitars, the traditional guitar soloing, or the hard rock, heavy metal, or
yeah, yeah,
hair band era of soloing. I think what was refreshing of us being kids of the '80s is coming out of that and then out of the straight power chord era of Nirvana, getting into the Sparta era.
yeah.
It was nice to have a sort of lead type of guitar lines to complement the rhythm, but that weren't necessarily someone playing obnoxious scales or
Right,
really
right.
a showcase like a Van Halen. No disrespect to Van Halen, obviously a great guitar player, but
Yeah,
style wise, it was nice to have something a little simpler, but that was still melodic and drove some rhythm
yeah,
without
yeah.
turning it into sort of the '80s sort of guitar virtuoso type of work.
Right.
And I think that was in a for those who less is more appeals to, or kind of the understated type of guitar leads. I think Jim Ward and Sparta and similar
Yeah,
bands really drove that, which was a breath of fresh air, coming out of a lot of the heavy guitar solo era that I think you and I both grew up in.
yeah, yeah. Cool, man. All right, you want to do your next one, or is that Sparta was your next one?
That was my number three.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
but I think
Hey,
I
your number
can,
four.
a nice foray into that, um, is Sunny Day Real Estate.
Oh,
So we're kind of, we started in Sacramento. We just went to El Paso, Texas with Sparta, and we can jump up to Seattle, where I think a lot of, the Pearl Jams and the Nirvanas and Soundgardens kind of came from. But I
yeah,
think Sunny Day Real Estate, again, same era, not a whole lot of commercial success, more of a cult type of a following. I think if you look at Spotify, they have, what did I kind of note here? Like only a couple 100,000, listeners versus, I mean, Sparta was even less, by the way, if you look at what their numbers were.
yeah.
I think that a lot of their stuff's in like the five figures is where I think Sunny Day, and they've been around longer, Sunny Day had. So, that might attribute.
Uh,
Um, but what was interesting about these guys is they were, very gritty, not particularly mainstream appealing. The early albums, Circles, I think, was their first kind of big album, or big
oh
meaning like a
yeah.
studio album. I think they were still on Sub Pop at the time. Or Circles was the song.
It was in
Running
circles. Yeah,
round in circles.
yeah,
So that was probably the most popular song off that album. I mean, people can debate that with me, and that's fine. I think I understand why at that time with the Nirvanas and the Soundgardens coming out that maybe that was a little less appealing. But if you listen, I think musically speaking, again, I'm no Rick Beato, but I think there's a lot of song composition that they do that was somewhat sophisticated for the era and the genre.
Yeah.
In having multiple changes in a song, pre-choruses, bridges, things where they really stitched together, and they were a little awkwardly done at times, but they pulled it off, and I think that's what made them unique. And for those of us rebellious folks who were just like tired of mainstream radio, it was a fresh alternative with some hooks that you could kind of listen to and anchor into the song, but also felt very different, refreshing, and gritty at the time, which maybe the appeal of more of kind of the youth or the alternative underground folks. What was cool about them is they evolved. If you kind of go through their albums and you get into like their second album, I think it's called How It Feels to Be Something On, and then into the Rising Tide?
Yeah.
The studio production got better. When you get all the way into kind of the Rising Tide era, I mean, that was a very polished album. I would push to say that it's a great album that you could listen to almost all the way through without sort of having songs that were so awkward or uncomfortable to listen to. You'd want to skip through them. And even the first... I'm going to look at I'm just going to cheat and look because I've been through so much of this music in the last 24 hours. When you get into that Rising Tide era, I want to quote the songs here. So if anybody hearing this, wants to reference them. Yeah. I mean, any of the first couple of songs on that album, they're just big guitar atmosphere. They have hooks to them. They've got a great chorus. I mean, there's so much to like about some of those songs, in contrast to the earlier albums where yes, they had those elements to them, but you really, I think, had to have a taste or an acquired taste for. Diary was the first studio album they did with Sub Pop. So
Diary,
there's some great tracks on that. I mean, in just Circles is great. A lot of people know that song already.
Yeah, dude. Well, I mean, to your point about the evolution of their sound, that first album sounds to me like they were just kids. And I don't mean that in a derogatory or talking down, but like when you're first starting out playing, and you hit something and you're just like, yeah, it's that high that you're kind of, and it becomes like maybe even becomes your sound, but there's a kind of a rawness to that first album. That's what attracted me to it, was the idea that, oh, this sounds like a local band. Like if I went to a like a bar or something, if we went to the old Vic back in the day, and saw a band or the Moonlight, like you could see them playing in a place like that, and it kind of made it more accessible because there wasn't this big gap of like, when you go see Van Halen, you're just like, whoa, it seems so big and so like, but when you hear a band like Sunny Day, you're like, oh yeah, okay, I could do that, and it gave you that kind of not hope, but inspiration that you would go out and play, and it wasn't really that hard, that you could just do it, and yeah, that was what really attracted me to them. That's a good pick, dude. Yeah,
that's a great point. Like accessibility. I think a lot of this music that we've talked about and will continue to talk about is your point. I echo that almost to the T.
Yeah.
Without taking away at all the technical and complexity of some of the songs that were written by any of these bands. I mean, there's certainly some things that are not a 4-chord or 3-chord in the truth music by any means.
Right.
And I think that's also part of what was refreshing about all these bands is that the guitar work and the complementing rhythm sections, it was just different. Wasn't quite the same as everything else. And to that point, to reference the album, their second album, How It Feels to Be Something On. The song Guitar in Video Games and 100 Million, like off that album, to me, those are kind of personally like timeless songs, and that they. And by the way, that album was a lot more kind of dark and a little slower, a little less gritty, but more introspective, maybe a little more kind of in a deeper, darker place, which was reflective. I think there's some YouTube documentaries on some of the things the band was going through. I think Jeremy Enoch, the singer, at some point had started embracing Christianity, and his whole perception of the world was changing, and so did the music along with it. But that's another nice thing with for anybody who's already knows Sunny Day Real Estate or is curious or Sunny Day Curious, each album is different, but it's similar enough to where it's like it's accessible, again, to your point. But you get something a little bit different with each album that keeps it fresh. You know, take a band like Tool, who's hugely commercially successful, maybe not so much radio play, but lots of ticket sales. They're playing huge arenas. But when you hear a Tool album, like, it's Tool through and through. Yeah, there's variances in kind of that style, but I think you take a Radiohead where they went from OK Computer to Kid A, and it's like like almost two different genres of music. But Sunny Day gave you a nice progressive evolution to where you knew it was Sunny Day Real Estate, but they got a little more polished, maybe a little bit more pop sensible as they went along. But I think that, back to the theme, very surprising to me during that era, especially when Rising Tide came out, why none of those really became big radio hits and why they didn't achieve that big commercial success. But hey, we still get to go see them. I think they're playing maybe in a couple of weeks, or is that Sparta that's playing down in San Francisco?
Sparta is not for their porcelain tour. They're not hitting San Francisco, and I think it's because, well, I went and saw them in San Francisco last year. It didn't sell out, but it was there. It was packed, but I guess it didn't sell out. And then they played probably about in June. They came and played a show at Neck of the Woods, that right there on California. Is it California?
I played Neck of the Woods.
Yeah. So
and
they played there. I didn't even know it. And so I think that, I don't know if a lot of people knew, because I'm up with the, send me alerts when they're on tour or there's a show near me, and I didn't get any alerts. So
here's an alert. Sunny Day Real Estate's playing in like 10 days in San Francisco. I think they're doing 2 nights.
Really? At the Fillmore again?
No, smaller venue. I have to check and see what. I'll look real quick. It's worth noting.
Yeah,
because they are playing at the August Hall.
Oh,
I don't know where that is. They're playing Monday and Tuesday, Tuesday and Wednesday night. I'm actually going to be in San Francisco on the 15th. Let's link up after this, and maybe we can meet up down there.
Yeah, well, I'm going to LA at the end of the month, or toward the end of the month. So,
well, this is the middle, so you're on the hook.
All right, here. Oh, go ahead.
Sparta was my number 3. We covered that with you.
Okay.
Yeah, just jump in with yours and let's see what's up.
My next one is Dredge, which is another band that you introduced me to, and I think they only had 2 albums and a live album at the time. We saw them. We see them twice together.
Potentially, I saw them a bunch of times, but yeah.
Okay, I saw them twice, I think. And they're one of the bands that I think are just as good live as they are in the studio. I think what really attracted me, and I've only listened to the first 3 albums. They have 5 albums. Let's see, 5 albums. Their last one being in 2012. The thing that really drove me attracted me to them was, a lot of bands you'll hear and they're really good on the CD, and then you see them live and they're just, they're not used to the big stage, and maybe they don't have a great stage presence. They were able to kind of, they had these high energy songs, And then when you went and saw them live, it was like amplified, but they
Mhm.
weren't jumping around and they weren't like doing the rock star thing. They were just that's just what came out of them. I mean, they were. It's almost like they were standing still. Like that dude would just sing, and maybe he would go to side to side, maybe
Right.
a couple times. But the guitar, the aggressiveness of all their instruments. They were into it. They would move. They weren't like stick figures, but it wasn't this grand show. It was more of like, here's the sound coming out of them. I mean, you have songs like Bug Eyes, Ode to the Sun, Not That Simple, Catch Without Arms. Like those songs to me were when I'd hear them live were just it just blew me away. And
They
it's
had
sad
great
because I
hooks.
think great hooks to your point again. It was they were relatively local. They were from like Los Gatos or
Yeah,
Santa
kind of down
Cruz.
in kind of the
Yeah.
South Bay, Central Valley of
And
California.
and so that's what really their album. Let's see what album. Hell,
Catch Without Arms.
yeah, it was Catch Without Arms, and then the next one was the Pariah, the Parrot, and the Delusion.
Yeah.
Which there's only a couple of songs off there that I really liked, but they were just we actually saw them at Snowcore again too. I
Yeah, I
think
think that was
right.
the first time we seen him. They played. I think that was the same show they played with Sparta, which was like what a
Yeah,
treat that was for me at the time.
yeah.
I loved both
And
of
we
those
even met
bands.
the drummer. The drummer was like walking through the crowd afterward, and we were like, "Hey, man,
I actually have a
dig it."
couple of his broken drumsticks. Yeah, to your circling back to your note about their live performance, I think
Yeah,
there was a certain humbleness and understatedness about the band's presence, but at the same time, like if you ever seen, I think his name is Dino Campanello. He was a
uh-huh.
maniac drummer. I mean, just like high sticking all the
Yeah,
time. Like I think he sort of covered that showmanship for the band. The bass player
yeah,
kind of could move around a lot too, but yeah, the music spoke for itself, and I think
yeah. Exactly. Good way to put it.
yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of sort of theater that came along with it, but the music in itself, in my opinion, it was almost sort of like progressive rock. Kind of had
Yeah,
like a little
yeah, yeah,
ounce of
yeah.
Tool dropped in there because a lot of atmospheric type of stuff. But yeah, the melody is fantastic. Some of the songs had some really good hooks. All of these, again, I think could have been somewhat commercially successful. Um, and
I
I'm
know
kind
they
of glad they
played on.
weren't again because we could see them for a reasonable price at a good
Right,
sized venue.
right.
Um, but
Well, they played on Kimmel. They would play on like the Late Show. I think they played with Conan. So I
how did I
mean,
not
they
know
had
that?
these avenues. Yeah, and they had these avenues where they would play these like stop by these talk shows, but it just never kind of got past that. And
Yeah,
but it was cool because it reminded me of like back in the early '80s when you would watch like David Letterman, and he would have like or Saturday Night Live, which I only see from the from like tapes or clips online. But back when they were really progressive about what bands were, they weren't playing like the top 10. They would play the top 10 bands, but they would also play these underground bands. Like they would have like David Letterman would have like Warren Zevon and Tom Waits and these musical icons, but he would also mix it in with all the popular stuff. And I think that's what when I would see Dredge on TV, I only saw him once or twice on TV, it was like, oh wow, cool. This is cool. Like I like that when they mix up the kind of underground stuff, not underground, but kind of lower level tiered bands. And sometimes they would explode, but other times they would just keep doing what they're doing. And I think that when they released their last album, I think they were like, well, we're going to take a break. And then I think in 16 or 17, they announced that they were breaking up or they had broken up or something. So
yeah,
sad day, but great band. Great band.
that's a great point too. Not to sort of vortex into another topic, but I think that's also speaks to in my opinion, the devolvement of sort of the entertainment industry. Where,
Yeah.
But speaking of late night TV, Sunny Day Real Estate actually played Letterman.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think as far as Dredge goes, I mean, I saw them live many times. I think I know I saw the live show at the Fillmore. I have the poster actually hanging up
Yeah. You
on the
gave
other
me one
side of
too,
the
because you
wall
had like
there.
three of them.
And
Yeah.
Yeah, just fantastic musicianship all around, not just in sort of song composition, but also in atmosphere and texture. So they did a really good
Yeah.
job with the bass. I was inspired to start playing bass by watching their bass player, because he
Yeah.
would play almost these like more staccato type of bass parts that weren't like doo 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 doo. He was very boop, 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 boop,
Uh-huh.
like a
Yeah.
lot
Yeah. Yeah.
more what I would call like a staccato style at times in the song, and then could switch to an effect that had a lot more of like a fat, resonant types of tones. So always
Right.
really appreciated the musicianship in terms of how they use texture with guitar and bass tones to create
Yeah.
the atmosphere and the texture of the song. And then of course Dino, the drummer, was just like a maniac all the time. Handled the showmanship piece of it, drove those songs like really hard, but could be
Every
able to kind of
every
dial it back.
song he put his soul into it. Yeah.
Yeah.
He would just it was just like you could just see him, but you could also see the joy and all the passion that he had. It's great.
Yeah. I feel sorry for
Good.
his drum tech. I think one time after a show, I flew up to Portland and saw them
Uh-huh.
play at a theater in Portland at some point. And my buddy James, James, we stuck
Yeah.
around for a little while afterwards. And I went up, and underneath his drum set, there was probably easily like 10 broken drumsticks. And I got one from there. The drum tech threw me one. But I mean, he just
Uh-huh.
destroyed. I saw at that show he had hit the snare so hard that it blew through the top head and through the bottom, and all the strands, the metal strands from the strainer were hanging
Yeah.
down. And the drum tech had to run out,
Yeah.
replace the entire snare drum, and get him some new sticks and get him back going. But he just kept playing through it. But it was frightening and also at the same time triumphant to see somebody so into their music and hitting so hard that they blew through the top and bottom head of a snare drum, like while playing live. Incredible.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, unfortunate maybe financially for them that they didn't have more commercial success, but I think that
Yeah.
they had, even for the era too, like a lot of these bands we talked about, I think either came out like too early in the
Yeah.
wave of the genre. Maybe people weren't ready for bands like Sunny Day Real Estate or the Spartas, where I think maybe
Yeah.
5 or 10 years later, had those albums come out, they might have had more, I think,
Yeah.
commercial or mainstream appeal. Dredge, I think, uh, similar thought there. So yeah, good pick on that. Anything else?
Yeah.
I kind of ran away with your
No, that's
Dredge
good.
pick, but
I think it's a good point to make, and I'll just make this really quick, and we'll go on to your next one. But when I worked for that band Abity,
mhm.
I feel like that was kind of what you're talking about. Is like I think they came around they were too early. I mean, not to say that they invented some sort of genre. They didn't. They were just straight ahead rock and roll. But you listen to Mammoth, like Eddie Van Halen's son, Wolfgang, his band, and it's like Abity could have opened up for this band because it's the same feel, the same like riff rock, but had the melodic vocals and all that kind of thing. And I think I was talking about it with the dude from the record store in Novato,
Is that
and he
still
saw my
open?
shirt. I was wearing an Abity shirt, and he's like, "Oh, hey, check this out!" And he had one of the albums, and I'm like, "Yeah, I used to work for them." And he was like, "Yeah, man. I mean, they were just ahead of their time because at that time, because when we would play shows, I would go and sell merch or take pictures or whatever. They would play these venues, and they were tight and they were rocked and they were loud, and then the band that they're opening up for would be this like, and no offense to emo, I love emo music, but it was just this emo band that was kind of like what do they call it, shoegaze,
Shoegaze.
shoegaze. That's what it is. And it was like, what? And they would, pack the house while when Abity was playing, there would be like no one in the audience. They'd be getting beers and so yeah,
I
that's
thought I
that's
remembered
yeah.
the opposite when I saw them, as they shredded, and then like the headliner came on and like half the people left. Maybe that was just the show I was at, but
I
I,
think
I
that
hear you
was
on that.
yeah, that was toward the end, I think. But yeah, go ahead with your next one.
Uh, let's see here. We covered Sparta. That was we have
Yeah,
that in common. I think we talked about Sunny Day and Far. And I'm just, we don't need to go into this because this is relatively new band from my that I like that really kind of came on my radar probably
Yeah.
during the pandemic when I was going back and really spending more time
Yeah.
exploring music. And this band had more commercial success in terms of they had songs on the alternative rock charts and rock charts according to Billboard. But Greta Van Fleet, I bring it up not to kind of fanboy them or say that they were underrated or they didn't achieve commercial success. And by the way, I'm going to make one last little point on the last few bands we've talked about. The only reason that I feel for these bands not achieving more commercial success or financial success is not because it's like I want them to be the next Foo Fighters, but
Right.
really those types of bands who come up, humble beginnings, play the clubs, do it, tour and sleep in a van and couch surf and do it the old fashioned gritty way. It's a huge sacrifice they make, as an adult now. And I have a 6-year-old son. And I think as an adult, these artists that are creating music that we have consumed, enjoyed, saw live, bought the t-shirts, all these things, these artists make huge sacrifices to do that. It seems glamorous and it seems like, oh, it's so cool. They're touring in a van and eating ramen and just having an adventure.
Yeah.
Of course, that's the fuel that drives the sacrifice at the time. But I think that a lot of these folks really deserve, I think, to have been able to make a living. And I think guys like Jim Ward will acknowledge that they were able to make a living because they were just big enough to like get by and pay the bills. But some other bands, didn't. So for those of you who ever go out and see those opening bands or have friends that play music, I mean, there's a lot of sacrifice that these groups make for their own personal gain. They could have got other jobs. They could have bought houses. They could have lived an easier life, but they stayed true to the grit because they were passionate about what they're doing. So
Here.
Here.
Well said.
As I'm drinking out of my 6-year-old's cup. The Greta Van Fleet, I think, kind of came on my radar. I think they showed up on some kind of playlist on a streaming platform or something. And, like everyone who's probably heard them is going, oh, it sounds just like Led Zeppelin. And I don't want to go too deep into all of this, but just, for anybody who hasn't seen them or anyone who has heard their music, they sound like Led Zeppelin. Mostly because the vocalist, it's very similar to Robert Plant. It's almost these big, long, screaming, vocal drops on some of these tracks. But I think the retro, I think there was this era, maybe in the late 90s, early 2000s, of these more like retro sounding bands who had I don't know if it was just sort of this lo-fi recording quality that they would have. I mean, I think even kind of the White Stripes and the Black Keys and things, that was that style of recording that had a little bit of that analog feel to it. But I think and I'll debate this with anybody who wants to talk shit about Greta Van Fleet. Yeah, they sound very similar to Led Zeppelin. But I think, as I mentioned to you, what I respect about them is that they just owned it. They just like, we were heavily influenced by Led Zeppelin and we sound like them, but they do their version of it their way. And I give them a pass on it and almost respect it, because I don't know there's anybody else that can sound like another band and pull it off without the criticism. But the one thing I think I appreciate about them, maybe a little more than Led Zeppelin, and this is not to take away from Led Zeppelin's everything, their legend and their just virtuoso musicianship of all the band members, but I feel like Greta Van Fleet, they're a little bit more groovy and funky in their more upbeat songs, and they can do very delicate ballads as well. Their ballads are incredible. If you ever listen to some of their slower songs and their ballads, I mean, they're every bit as epic as anything you've ever heard. But they're, I shouldn't say epic, but I should say ballad quality. But I'll give them that you can almost dance to some Greta Van Fleet songs because they have that kind of groove and that sort of backbeat to them in the rhythm section where you can almost kind of dance to it. It has this like little bit of a funk groovy edge to it. And to me, I welcome a Led Zeppelin version that has that quality about it. As I've gotten older and had a taste for electronic music and been to Burning Man and festivals, like I like something I could dance to. And I think at some point in my era of playing drums in a punk band, I was always like, people either mosh or stand there with their mouth open. And it was like music that you can dance to, like people still or bob their head to, even like
Right.
have that like
Yeah.
hip hop sort of quality to it. That's my 2 cents about Greta Van Fleet. Why I don't give a shit that they sound a lot like Led Zeppelin. They do it well. They do it in their own way. And I think where they have a leg up in modern music, if you're going to sound like Led Zeppelin, is like you can almost dance to it. It's groovy.
Right. Yeah.
I say, fuck you if you want to talk shit. Go listen to it. Appreciate
Uh-huh.
the parts of them that are different than Led Zeppelin rather
Right.
than hating on it because it has a lot of similar qualities to it. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
And I kind of, in the process of preparing for this, disqualify them from sort of underrated because they did achieve some degree of commercial success, but maybe controversially because of their overlap with the Led Zeppelin sound. So I'll set that one down.
That's awesome, dude. I think, that's the beauty of music too, is that you can like the same bands or dislike the same band, or, just from your own experience, and you can bring your own stuff to it. And that's what I always liked about playing music and stuff. And actually playing music gives you an appreciation, and it kind of, for me and maybe you, it stopped there. It, because I worked in like the Virgin Megastore, Tower, Rasputin. I've worked in all these like record stores. The one thing I've learned that I can't stand is the whole, oh yeah, I liked them better when they were this band, or oh, I saw them open up for this band, and they were, just that whole kind of pretentious type of like gatekeeping that tends to happen in the music industry. It's just like,
I think I might be a little bit guilty of that myself. So
I think we all are. I mean, I think at some point,
but I get, I can imagine the store and the record store, the scene, what you're talking about, where people, it's less about their tastes, it's about taking their taste so seriously.
Yeah, it becomes like lifestyle music,
Yeah,
like
you've busted my balls for talking shit like that about bands and getting in that way, and I get it, and maybe I deserve it, but
no, but I've done it too, so the blame goes all around.
Billy Joel, so
me, I don't hate Billy Joel.
I'm kidding. I'm referencing our conversation the other night.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Okay. So I have one more. Oh, no, I have two more actually. Okay, so two more. I don't know which one. Local Natives was a band that I kind of got into when I moved the second time to San Francisco back in 2009. Or no, yeah, I moved there in 2009, but they came out with this album in 2010. And then they came out, it was called Gorilla Manor, I think it was, their first album. The hit off of that one was World News, and it just had this kind of weird kind of, it was like a chanting song. It also was kind of had that, what you were talking about, that kind of lo-fi, independent rock sensibility to it. And that really hooked me. And then they came out with this album called Sunlit Youth. Let me see. Hold on a second.
I'm looking at them now. I've heard the name enough times, so this is actually some homework for me. I'm really curious.
Yeah.
Is it still kind of in that sort of alt rock genre, or are we talking something? How would you describe?
Yeah, it's kind of like, I would say they kind of, I don't even know how to describe them. Maybe like Radiohead-ish in the sense of they have like a lot of atmosphere to their songs.
Mm-hmm.
Like when they play a song, it's not only what they're playing or what they're singing about, but it's also the kind of atmosphere they kind of create with their music and the lyrics. I don't know, it's hard to explain. But they came out with another album called Sunlit Youth, and I think Dark Days was kind of a popular song for a minute. I heard it a bunch online, going to social media networks, and you would hear them, like if someone would post a video, like an Instagram post, they would have that song in the background. And then they came out with Violet Street, which was, I think, in 19, and
Oh wow,
I
so this
was
is pretty
really
current.
hooked on. What was that?
This is all pretty current music then.
Yeah, yeah. And they came out with a song called "When Am I Gonna Lose You," and that was really that was a great song for me. It's very like piano. It starts out with a piano, but then it kicks in, and it has that. Actually, it has that kind of. And I'm not a. You could probably speak more to this than I could, but it has like techno feel to it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's the right word of house, but it has that. Boom, boom. It just has a beat that's kind of in that. I would always say
Yeah.
like electronic,
No, I'm actually
but
excited
it's
to
natural.
hear about
It's
this.
natural. It isn't electronic, but they mix the two very well. So, and I never saw them live. I wish I would. I remember when I lived in San Francisco, this happened all the time, which I would get into a band and then look to see if they were playing, and they had just played like the night before. And, they were small enough that they weren't going to come back around for another like 5 years. So I'd be like,
Oh, boo.
um,
And
yeah. Go ahead.
looking at their kind of discography, it looks like they've been around for a minute, and they just put something out
Yeah.
in 2023.
Yeah. I think they put, but I'll wait for you. They put it out this year. It was released April 19th of this year. I haven't heard it yet. So, but
Wow.
they're a
Okay.
band it was always in the peripheral, it
Mm-hmm.
was always in my peripheral kind of vision of like, I would be listening to something and it would be like, oh, if you like this band, you'll like this. Oh yeah. Okay. And then I would always play the song and it would always be great. And, there's some songs I liked from them that it's kind of um, some other bands that you like I love Wiretap Scars, but I couldn't tell you the order of the songs or some of the names. But I love that album. I've listened to it millions of times, so
Oh yeah,
it's kind of like one of those things.
Toby, he's the master of like knowing all the song names on all the
Yeah,
albums.
yeah.
We'll be chatting
So
a while back. He's like, "Yeah, this song and that song." I'm like, "Fuck!" I'm like, "What album was that on? What year?" Like, how do you know that? Like,
yeah,
I know the chorus and the hook, and I'll always remember those. But yeah, I'm
yeah,
excited to check out Local Natives. I've seen their name around. I feel like they've popped up on playlists, or I may have accidentally
yeah,
seen them live a time or two,
yeah,
or at least part of their songs. But I think I'm admittedly a little bit out of touch with a lot of more modern kind of mainstream music,
yeah,
but I'm excited to hear, like, I feel like there was this no man's land kind of in between genres as we were moving from a very digitally based sort of music distribution channel where we didn't have the MTVs, a lot of the smaller clubs that were
yeah,
open before the pandemic. I mean, a lot of these things took a big hit and everything became much more sort of through digital platforms rather than kind of the old fashioned way. And I don't even want to
yeah,
call it old fashioned. I think it's a really important journey for a band to have. Remember Minus the Bear?
yeah. Oh,
There
I
were,
was gonna put those on here. Yeah,
they were at the time, I think in kind of the late 2000s, early 2010s. I mean, there was criticism that I read in Billboard, some pretty well-known publication. I don't remember exactly
yeah,
where it was. That like, oh, people are just called them like a YouTube sensation. That's how they were discovered. Was
right,
they were putting out music and videos on YouTube, and it sort of caught fire for a period of
right.
time. They were able to tour and produce a few albums. But I think that nowadays a lot of music just comes through digital channels, and there's a lack of the live experience and being able to understand like what the vibe of the band really is, like seeing it in
Yeah.
person versus studio, like totally different genre. But like that whole Spearhead and what's his name,
Oh,
Michael
the lead
Franti,
singer.
right?
Yeah,
Like I think their albums are like, I don't like them at all.
yeah,
But then seeing them live is like a completely different experience. And
yeah,
so I make that contrast because there's some bands that I think you and I saw Silver Sun Pickups live. I mean, they sound amazing live as they do on an album.
yeah,
You referenced it with
yeah.
Dredge. Lots of love for the Deftones, but man, I've seen him play some real sloppy shitty sets live versus like they're great, I think, in
Yeah.
a recording.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious to see local natives, to listen to them. Thanks for the tip
Oh
on
yeah.
the
Yeah.
tracks. And I'm hungry for something fresh, even if it's a little different
Cool.
than my.
Yeah. That's cool. You'll like my next one too if you
Do it.
Oh, okay. This one they only have I found in the pandemic when the shutdown, and I was doing what you were doing. I was just listening to music. I was making a lot of music at the time too, and so I was always looking to see if I could find a band that wasn't really in my wheelhouse, because I tend to kind of I have my bands, and if I don't hear anything new for a while, I'll just stick with those bands, and that's what I was in. So I was like, I need to get out. I need to find some new stuff. And this one, I don't even know if I'm saying this right, but it's called the Viral Society.
Oh, okay. Don't know them. Awesome.
Viral, VRYLL. They only have one album. Again, when I got into them, I was playing that album, um, just all the time. And they broke up. And there's some live performances on YouTube that I would see. They were great live, it looked like, but some songs to kind of some of my favorites are "Chorus of the Satellite," which is the first song of the album by the same name. Andrea Rublev, it's a Russian name, it seems like, and "Light at the Edge of the World" are the three songs that, for me, kind of I was like taking like drum patterns from them and trying to make songs on my own, because they just kind of blew me out of the water, because it came out of nowhere. I think I was listening to something. I think I was listening to The War on Drugs, which is a new band. They're okay, but
I
at the
love the
bottom
War on
of
Drugs. Are you kidding me? Those guys are amazing. No.
what? But at the bottom, in Apple Music, they have other similar artists, and I just clicked on this, and I was kind of blown away. But they have that kind of not techno. I don't want to say electronic sound, maybe,
Sure.
to them. But they're all playing instruments. It's not like electronic drum, although they have those probably programmed at some point. But they're a great band as well. They remind me of kind of um, the Flaming Lips, but better vocals and more tighter.
Are you
Although I
kidding?
love the
Flaming
Flaming Lips
Lips.
and I
Their
love how they
vocals
are.
were polished, in tune, beautiful lines. Voice
Well, that's
never
part of their
cracked.
sound, and I love that sound. I love that part of them, because I probably fit into, but this is kind of a little more concise, a little more tight.
Well, I like the concise. That yeah.
Yeah. So that was, and I got one, or I had one honorable mention. Oh, never mind.
Honorable mention. Yeah, they're a great band.
So those are my five, I think. 1, 2. Oh, and I got one other one. Real estate was my
I'll drop
one.
my fifth in there, and because I could do a whole podcast on this whole entire band, but the Manchester Orchestra, if you've never heard them, whether you're into sort of like hard rock or indie, whatever these other kind of sub labels of alternative rock that you kind of want to put on there, or whether you're just like a music aficionado in terms of appreciating song composition, I think composition would be a really good way to describe some of the more musical complexities of the music under the umbrella of sort of like rock. I mean, you could argue jazz and other types of genres might have some more musical complexity to them in terms of, chords and things, that the way things are stitched together, playing in keys that might be a little more difficult to play.
Yeah.
The Manchester Orchestra, I'll never forget. I got married and I moved into this house, and I was setting up my office in this spare bedroom that we had, and I was going through this stack of like loose CDs, and I had found this, one of those compilation CDs from some tour, and I popped it in my computer because back then I had a computer that still had a CD player in it, the disk drive, and it had a CD burner.
Yeah.
This was in 2011, 2012. Anyway, that song "Shake It Out" came on, and at first I was kind of like, I wasn't really that impressed. But as the song went on, I was like, wow, this is actually really good. And then I had started diving into a lot of their other records, including Everything to Nothing, and then you get into, I think it was Simple Math, and then their newer stuff, even that's more current, when they came out with. I think it was called Cope. I flew to San Diego, by the way, like 2 days after I got home from Burning Man. I jumped on a plane in San Francisco or Oakland and flew to San Diego to see them live because they had played in San Francisco while I was at Burning Man. And I got back. I'm like, God damn it, I want to see them. So I like had a credit card at the time, and I'm like, I'm just going to put this whole trip on my credit card and go. But I think we've already eaten up a lot of time, and I could do like a whole hour on this topic, but Manchester Orchestra, I think, again, a band with a really strong kind of, I wouldn't even call it a cult following, but just kind of an underground following. They're still looking at, I think, about 1 million listeners on Spotify. They have a handful of songs that, have over 1 million plays. But I think, you don't hear this stuff on the radio. Not that I listen to the radio a lot, but it just doesn't get a lot of mainstream attention. But here's a band that has it all, right? If we take everything from, the Sunny Day Real Estates and the Spartas to, the Greta Van Fleets and some of the bands that you mentioned, I mean, these guys are, the progression of their albums, you can hear the evolution, but they've done these, like, if you go to their more recent stuff, like Million Masks of God, I mean, that album is just, it took me a while to really like the whole album, but it's just really incredibly well written. Song composition, dynamics are incredible. The drummer is insane to me, not because, he's a Chad Smith or a Danny Carey, but if you listen across a lot of the albums, it's very rare that he will play the same beat or the same kick or snare pattern on almost anything. He does these really cool, like, syncopated stuff on some stuff from like Everything to Nothing. Stuff that as a drummer myself would be very difficult for me to dissect and like try to replicate. So love the rhythm section there. The vocals and the guitar parts, they have 2 guitar players that just play off of each other. Not a whole lot of crazy leads, but a little more complex kind of rhythms and melodies all woven together.
Right.
And just pure, some technical skill. I mean, if you watch videos, I mean, I'm not I'm like a 3 chords in the truth kind of guitar player, as a hobby, but I mean, you play guitar. I mean, I watch this guy play, and some of these chords that they're playing.
Yeah. Well, it's the voicings that they choose.
Voicings. That's what I'm looking for. Thank you.
Yeah. And going back to the drummer's part, the drummer reminds me of the drummer from, what's it? Death Cab for Cutie. In a sense of like, in a sense that they both play in these kind of not understated. They both play in these kind of bands that don't require like the big, 24-piece drum set or anything like that. But they have that ability, and they're kind of the master of their instrument, and they bring a lot to their band because, like in Death Cab, they have really cool rhythms too. They're really tight. The drummer's really tight, but he is like, his idol was Neil Peart, so he was on the Rush documentary talking about Neil.
Oh, the drummer.
So they have that they have the skills to play like double bass and, but they choose to kind of channel their talent into these bands, and it kind of becomes a part of that sound. So if you take out that drummer, it's like you would hear it. That's how it affects their band.
That's a great point. There's a song called Apprehension that's on their Simple Math album, which I think was, let me look at the year here, 2011 it came out. There's the fills and transitions and even some of the drum intros that he does on some of the songs are just not common, but still fit the song and are still groovy, but they're sort of, I would call them very curious. Like when I heard him as a drummer, I was like, it fits the song and it's cool and you could almost not notice it. But there's this curiousness about how he uses even drum phrasing or even some of the patterns of how he'll do things that are a little bit offbeat, or maybe there'll be an accent on a 3 instead of a 2 and a 4, and it kind of gives you this little what was that, like a little shimmy about, they kind of juke you musically like an athlete would, where you think that they're gonna, like a football player is gonna run a pattern and then they kind of do a shake and bake, like he'll shake and bake on the drums.
They should zag. Yeah.
In a subtle way that doesn't sort of stand out or say, hey, look at me, I'm doing a thing here on the drums.
Right.
Really appreciate that about that. And if you just go through, there's a lot of albums. I think they have 7 or 8 albums. But going through the early stuff all the way to The Million Masks of God, which I think came out in 2021, 22, they are highly adept at creating moods. I feel like a lot of their more recent stuff could be in movies because of they're almost symphonic in a way about how they compose a song, use keyboard, use guitar, drums, bass, and vocals. It's incredibly rich music.
Yeah, that's a good description of that.
And if you're a fan of the more gritty kind of 90s underground kind of thing, then like just eat up the older albums. There are some absolute brilliant songs on some of the older albums, and some awkward stuff, that maybe isn't as easy to listen to. But again, the theme being kind of underrated, not much commercial success. I really don't understand why they didn't. There are plenty of songs on, especially their last few albums, that have great hooks to them that I could hear being on the radio or featured somewhere. They have played some late night TV. It's not like nobody knows who Manchester Orchestra is.
Yeah.
But they're not, charting and doing these big stadium tours. And one sort of, I don't know if I'd call it a brag, but I saw him when just before the pandemic in 2019, I believe I got to see them do a tour where they were playing the Everything to Nothing album at the Warfield. Pretty big venue in San Francisco. Not that, so I don't want to.
It's a great place to see bands though.
Yeah. I was on a work trip and I stayed an extra night and saw them, and it was, and to the note you were saying about live performance versus studio, who's good.
Yeah.
Another band that's fantastic live, brings that energy, but still plays live as they do on the album without it sort of throwing you off that you're hearing a different band versus what you've consumed on a recording.
Yeah.
I know we don't really have the time to dissect a lot of albums and songs by them, but it's my number one because I think it stood the test of time for me. I discovered them in 2011. I remember when I moved into this house, 2012. 12, 13 years later, I think they're still a relevant band. They're still putting out new music. They're doing EPs. The singer and some of the other members have done some side projects. One of them's called something Books, Bad Books. They've done some like collaborations with some independent artists. I love this song that they do with, where is it? It's called You at the Table. My 6-year-old loved that song for months. They were featured on, I'm trying to look it up here. Here it is. Appears on Proof of Life album by Joy Oladokun. The song's called You at the Table. It was a great track that was done in collaboration. I believe Joy was sort of an independent artist who really makes her own music like in the loft in her house, and it's somewhere out of Atlanta, I want to say, but also a cool artist. But they're doing collabs with like underground artists that are making
Right.
records in their basements, here in 2000 in the 2020s. So really, I think a relevant band today that has plenty of deep older albums that you could just eat up if it's totally new to you or you've dabbled in it before. By all means, like, yeah,
hit it up.
Yeah, I mean, you could, and there's a spectrum of things to like, and things enough to not like if you don't like it, to kind of set it aside and appreciate what you do. And on that note, I'll kind of shut up about it because I could go on about,
Yeah, no, I think they're a great band. I have to agree with you on every point because I think they're the bands that I just got recently into, probably in the last 2 years, 3 years. I've always heard of them, but I just never really kind of got around to listening. And yeah, I feel the same way, man. We should probably do a podcast on just the brilliance of their catalog. Yeah, we've been going for an hour 20, so I'm thinking we should probably wrap this up. But I had a great time, dude. I think we should do this more often. I think we should, do some more deep digging into some artists. Maybe it could be an artist that you like or that I've never heard of, or maybe an artist I like you've never heard of, whatever. So
yeah, hopefully we didn't put anybody to sleep, but if you're able to hashtag the band names, I mean, I'd love to hear comments or input from anybody about not so much agree or disagree, but maybe point out a band or a song or an album that deserved a little bit more attention. Even I'd
more love,
and have someone say, and I'd love them to go back. My homework is really checking out Local Natives and the Virile Society. Excited to hear about new music that you talked about, and for anybody who hasn't heard any of the bands we've talked about, like, throw in your ear pods and check it out.
Well, like you said, everybody, give us a list of your bands that need some loving or more attention in the comments if you want to do that. I'm going to link all the bands we talked about today in the description. And again, Jarrett,